Good morning and greetings, Bodhisattvas.
Good morning.
Good morning.
My topic today is a change of seasons. With the fall equinox, we mark the end of one cycle and the beginning of another. The end of summer and, we hope, a 2-year drought. A serious El Nino struck us during this week while I was preparing this talk. And we have to ask, will it bring the life-restoring fall rains that we have always experienced here in Olympia in the past? At such times of transition, we're reminded of change and the truth of impermanence. Every school teacher and every parent knows that the new year really starts in September, not January. It's the start of a new cycle, the sun lowering toward the horizon, the sudden torrential rain, the downhill slide into winter with its darkness, its cold, and its inevitable power outages. I invite you to take a look with me at some of the cyclical changes we and our Dharma ancestors have passed through. First, let's take a look at Dogen, the 13th century founder of the Sotoshu lineage. I'm taking as my text my very favorite of all his fascicles in Shobogenzo, probably with the exception of that other one, but never mind. I'm taking as my text one of my very favorite of all his fascicles, Sansui Kyo, or the Mountains and Rivers Sutra. I am the person least qualified to interpret Dogen. This is for 3 reasons. First, there's the question, what did he actually say? Unless we can read medieval Sino-Japanese, we're dependent on translations. And what is the bias of the translator? We have 2 or 3 translations here in our Zendo library, and they don't entirely concur. Second, each fascicle in the Shobogenzo has been subject to 800 years of commentary. And to me, I find the commentaries more confusing than the original. Third, for Dogen, each fascicle is merely a metaphor for practice enlightenment. For these reasons, I always prefer to stick as closely as I can to his words, and I prefer a more literal translation to something that may be the more traditional or poetic. Here, then, are some of his words about mountains and waters. From verse 1, we read, "Mountains and waters right now are the actualization of the Buddha way. Because mountains and waters have been active for long ages, they are alive at this moment." In verse 2, we read, "Because mountains are high and broad, the way of riding the clouds is always reached in the mountains." How true that is. How well we who love the peaks of the Cascades and the Olympics know this. Climbing above the drizzle and the cloud cover. There's no other way to do it except by airplane. In verses 3 and 4, Dogen says, "Mountains always abide in ease and always walk. Because green mountains always walk, they are permanent. At this moment, you cannot doubt the green mountains walking. 800 years ago, the mountains symbolized permanence. Yet Dogen saw clearly that they were always in movement. His now, 800 years ago, was not our now, but now Nyose, the eternal present. Just this. Just what is right here now. Dogen says in verse 5, you should study the green mountains. In verse 6, we read, mountains manifest their form and life force. There is walking. There is a moment a mountain gives birth to a mountain child. How many of us might have had this very experience hiking in our beautiful Northwest Mountains? We're hiking along, enjoying the beauty of the evergreens and flowering meadows, and suddenly there is no I walking along. There's only the mountain child. Verse 8. Quoting an earlier master, Dogen says, Eastern mountains travel on water. All mountains are eastern mountains. I think we'd be more concerned with western mountains, but the point is made. Water comes down from the sky, down from the glacier, down from the mountains. We read in verse 11, when water solidifies, it is harder than a diamond. When it melts, it is gentler than milk. This is not just studying the moment when we see water. This is the moment when water sees water. So water being water, water doing what water does. And in verse 12, water is seen as dead or alive depending on causes and conditions. Dogen thoroughly understood the water cycle. The path of water is such that when it rises to the sky, it becomes raindrops. When it falls to the ground, it becomes rivers. The path of water is not noticed by water, but is realized by water. When it rises to the sky, it becomes single raindrops. That means that water rises to the sky everywhere and forms raindrops. Raindrops vary according to the different worlds. In other words, water seeks its own level. Even in a drop of water, innumerable Buddha lands appear. And we know that even in a drop of water, there's many, many life forms living in that water that we can't see with our eyes. In verse 18, Dogen says, although mountains belong to the nation, and we do, for the most part, hike on government land when we're hiking here in our own mountains, state and national parks, refuges, and public trails. And Dogen goes on, since mountains belong to the wise people living there, trees and rocks become abundant and birds and animals are inspired. We would probably be more inclined to say that birds and animals appear because we have been wise enough to preserve them. So Dogen goes on in the same verse 18. The 12 years of Shakyamuni Buddha's practice of the way were mostly spent in the mountains, and his attainment of the way occurred in the mountains. This is true. And in verse 21, water is only the true thusness of water. Water is water's complete virtue. When you investigate water, excuse me, when you investigate water, mastery of all things is immediately present. And finally, it's not the end of the Fasco, but it's the end of what I'm going to quote. Therefore, he says, investigate mountains thoroughly. When you investigate mountains thoroughly, this is the work of mountains. So let's follow Dogen's advice. Let us look directly at the mountains and waters right here before us and forthrightly see what is there. Yes, the mountains are walking. With the movement of the tectonic plates, they rise with volcanic eruptions and fall as they erode away, a process that has gone on for the last billion years or so. But now something new is happening. Glaciers, in place since the last ice age, are melting, draining away into the sea as oceans rise. Within maybe about 3 years, scientists are predicting all the glacial ice on Mount Rainier will be gone. Precious drinking water flows away. As it melts into the Nisqually River, it carries away visible amounts of sand and rock. Just go to our local refuge and stand at the Nisqually River overlook, and you can see the debris and rocks and you can visibly see the land washing away. A 2-year drought has struck here locally, causing widespread wildfires, including the one that destroyed the town of Lahaina, one of the most beautiful cities in the United States, just a couple of months ago. And don't look surprised when I point out that this wildfire, like the one in Tumwater, started on July 4th. Connection? Landslides at Mount St. Helens and Hurricane Ridge, forest fire on Mount Rainier. The mountains are walking all right, rushing as fast as they can into the sea. We in Thurston County are very fortunate to have a really extensive and deep reservoir of groundwater, which is being carefully monitored. The League of Women Voters had a series of workshops on this a couple years ago, which I was able to attend. But most places in the world do not have such a resource. In Alaska, the great glaciers calve into the sea, but do not replace themselves on land. Once a berg is gone, it's gone, and that glacial ice is gone. Lake Mead is drying up. The mighty Colorado no longer reaches the sea. Bangladesh? Well, Pacific Islands without drinking water as the salt water overwhelms them. Coral reefs too hot. Coral reefs in too hot water are dying, and the many beings they support die with them. And have I mentioned our native salmon? We mourn all of this, but there's nothing we can do about it. Scientists did the math 40 years ago, and we were warned. I don't mean to place blame. I'm as much to blame as anyone else. But I would just like to point out, everyone here in this room this morning came here in a car. Only one of our members, and he's not here, has a fully solar-powered car. Yes, it's nice that these electric and hybrid cars have been invented, but very few of them can afford to buy one. In an economy controlled by the oil cartels, we have the best of intentions, but no real choices. Now, a major El Niño event appears to be restoring the fall rains. But this one is fueled by a major hotspot in the middle of the Pacific. The ocean is carrying unprecedented heat. And I had to, almost every day, I've had to revise my text because the rain that I was expecting didn't continue at all. We had a big storm, and we had one day of the big storm. I said, oh, the rain is back. Life-giving, ending the drought. But actually, in my rain gauge, only about an inch of water actually fell. Causes and conditions. What goes around comes around. Can we not place Mother Earth on our sick list for 49 days? And I have no solution to offer, or no conclusion to draw, really. So I want to take 1 minute of silent sitting to help us deal with all this. Thank you. So, my next topic deals with the way in which one person's life cycle reflects a cycle similar to that of seasonal change. Change goes on all around us at every moment, but at these times that are marked as important on the calendar in our culture, we become acutely aware of it. We feel it in our bodies. Wild animals do too, and certainly birds do. These cyclical changes can also be expressed in the arc of a human life. And as an example, I'm going to take the work of Thomas Merton, most of whose works are available in our Zendo library, and these two will be available as soon as I turn them in. I think all of us are aware of Merton's many works published by his Catholic order, headquartered at a monastery called the Abbey of Gethsemane. Why Merton, who wasn't even a Buddhist, or was he? Because I myself owe a great debt to Merton. Merton hit the bestseller list with his early work, The Magic Mountain, where he recounts how a private retreat in the mountains convinced him on his return, when he came back, to enter a monastery. Like Dogen, he was drawn to the mountains. Within his order, he rose to become a teacher of newly arriving novices and wrote many short works on points of Catholic doctrine for the training of these novices. The popularity of his many book-length works, all published by the Abbey, actually formed a large part of their funding. In my favorite of all his books, called Zen and the Birds of Appetite, he quotes D.T. Suzuki. The absolute is in no way distinct from the world of discrimination. Zen is consciousness, therefore, in a sense, void. And in Zen enlightenment, the discovery of the quote, original face before you were born is the discovery not that one sees the Buddha, but that one is Buddha. The Buddha is your everyday mind. And elsewhere, Zen explains nothing. It just sees. Sees what? Not an absolute object, but absolute seeing. In a later work, Mystics and Zen Masters, he devotes the last 80 pages to Buddhist practice. And his very last work was this one, The Asian Journal of Thomas Merton. In this work, he devotes, again, the last 80 pages to, I'm repeating myself. His last work was the Asian Journal of Thomas Merton, which detailed his final 29-day whirlwind tour of Indonesia, Nepal, Sri Lanka, and India. He had made a similar trip the year before, but did not write a book. This time, he came with an agenda. He toured India from Kanyakumari at the southern tip of where you catch the boat to Sri Lanka, looking for all the teachers he wanted to meet. He details his 3 audiences with the Dalai Lama and his meetings with teachers of all stripes in his effort to understand. He wrote as a Christian trying to explain Zen to fellow Christians. Or did he? In reading of his Himalayan trek, what a delight it was for me to see the many photos that he took with his own hands of people and places that I knew during the summer I spent at the young Lama's homeschool in Dalhousie. Merton was there about 3 years after I was. But Merton never really understood, if this book can guide us, and I'm not at all sure about that, Merton never really understood that Zen is not a set of ideas or even a set of koans, but a practice in the context of teacher, forms, and sangha. His tour ended in Bangkok, where, alone in his hotel room, he was electrocuted by a large fan that fell on him. Now, this is not as bizarre as it sounds. I nearly electrocuted myself during a summer in Nepal by turning on a fan standing on an aluminum table. Such was the quality of Asian-made appliances in the 1960s. I'm sure there are better fans in India now. Merton was quite ill by the time he left India. For 3 weeks, he had scrambled to meet prominent Buddhists, as well as visiting every nearby Christian church and mission, practicing a homily and or offering a mass at each. And in his spare time, finding the energy to write a 300-page book. He caught the most severe cold of his life, and throughout the journey, he repeatedly complained of being able to find enough space for solitude. Even at his home monastery, the pressure of being famous was too much for him. He thought Alaska would be the best place for solitude. None of his published work hints at it, but he also thought of Hawaii. The year before his final tour, previous year when he came around, he had contacted the University of Hawaii Religion Department saying that he planned to resign from his order, give up the robe, and convert to Zen. Could they offer him a teaching program, a teaching position? Well, could they? Thomas Merton writes to you and says, can you offer me a teaching position? They built a new master's program around him. He had accepted. They designed the courses to be offered and obtained the approval of the Board of Regents. But now, he was dead. And he had not leaked his plans to his order. He was going to present them with a fait accompli. They quickly claimed his body and gave him a Christian burial at the Abbey. They heavily edited his final book, this one, the Asian Journal. They extensively edited because they couldn't read his writing. There's no hint that he ever intended to publish such a book. These were his personal thoughts and feelings as he met these great teachers. So they edited his final book, apparently leaving out much because they could not read his writing, and rushed his early Christian teaching materials into reprints, which would continue to support their monastery financially. They thought they understood him. Back in Hawaii, the master's program was put on hold for a year while a worldwide search for a comparable candidate was found. My husband was the best applicant they found, so we moved to Honolulu. My husband was already sitting zazen at a center in Aitken Roshi's lineage in New York, but I was still involved in Tibetan practice, although I never found a teacher who I really wanted to accept as my teacher. I thought nobody was good enough for me. So on our arrival, it was quite natural for us to begin sitting with Aitken Roshi at Kokawan, across the street from the university campus. And the rest is history.